Why had the radio gone silent? For 6 hours, Staff Sergeant Hadley Mitchell had been nothing but a shadow stitched into the fog. Her breathing blended with the mountain wind. Her heartbeat matched the rhythm of the rain on stone. At 8,000 feet above sea level in the shrouded spines of the Hindu Kush, visibility came and went like memory. The SEAL team below, 12 men moving in disciplined silence, had no idea she was watching them from the ridge line. That was the point. She was the ghost in their story. Her mission wasn't to join their assault. She was the unseen, the one who watched from a distance and reported patterns. For 72 hours she had been a whisper on a secure channel, a line of encrypted data flowing into the operations center miles away. Surveillance, observation, no engagement. But war has a habit of ignoring instructions. When the fog began to thicken again, Hadley crouched on a jagged shelf of rock, scanning through her rangefinder. Her hazel eyes, sharp and deliberate, measured distance the way others measured fear. Below her, the SEAL team waited near a frozen river, preparing for their next move. They were trained, experienced, confident. Yet even confidence fades when the first shots echo across a mountain valley. The radio crackled. Contact, multiple enemy shooters on the ridge line. 2,000 meters, maybe more, can't even see them. Hadley's thumb paused on her rangefinder. 2,000 meters. The words tightened something deep inside her, an instinct, not fear. The SEAL team leader's voice followed, low and strained. Enemies at 2,000 meters, that's beyond our reach. We need specialized support, but there's no time. Hadley's decision came in the space between heartbeats. She unclipped her rifle from her back, the matte finish of her custom-built .338 Lapua catching a faint glint of daylight through the fog. Then she moved. Down the slope through the mist, the mountain air thick with the smell of iron and wet soil. To the men below, she appeared like something conjured, first a faint silhouette, then the slow reveal of a soldier moving toward them through vapor and silence. One of them raised his weapon, startled. But Hadley didn't stop. She walked straight past them, boots steady on the loose shale, until she reached a low outcropping where the fog broke enough to see the ridge line beyond. She dropped to a knee, extended the bipod, and spoke in a calm voice that cut through the static. "I've got the distance." The team froze. No one recognized her voice. Lieutenant Jake Morrison, the SEAL commander, turned sharply. He looked at her like a mirage he couldn't decide to trust or shoot. "Who the hell are you?" "Staff Sergeant Hadley Mitchell," she said, her hands working fast and precise over her rifle. "Independent surveillance element. I've been in these mountains for 3 days. Counter-sniper support. Where are your shooters?" "Counter-sniper," Morrison blinked, squinting through the haze. "We didn't request." "You've got enemy snipers at extreme range," she interrupted. "I heard your transmission. You need someone who can reach that far. That's what I do. Now show me where they are." The lieutenant hesitated. It wasn't that he doubted her. It was that everything about her presence defied logic. No one had briefed them about a female sniper operating solo in this sector. But the urgency of incoming fire left no room for debate. He nodded toward the northern ridge. "There, elevation above us. We've been taking accurate hits for 10 minutes. Can't pinpoint their positions." Hadley raised her rangefinder, scanning the ridgeline as fog rolled in and out like the tide. "How many?" "At least 3, Morrison said. "Maybe more." She watched through the device, reading terrain the way others read faces. "Have they been shifting between shots?" "Seems like it," said Chief Ryan Carter, the second in command. "They shoot, then move. Fog's making it hard to tell." Hadley nodded once. "Then let's make them comfortable. I need your team to stay in hard cover for 15 minutes. No movement, no return fire. Let them think you're pinned. Confidence makes people sloppy." The lieutenant studied her again. Late 20s, lean build, calm posture. Her rifle wasn't standard issue. It was custom, personal, cared for like a piece of her soul. Her tone wasn't arrogance. It was something colder, certainty. He keyed his radio. All stations hold fire, maintain cover, let's see what our guest can do. Hadley was already at work. She ranged multiple points across the northern slope, 1,950 meters, 2,110. The fog shifted like breath across glass, breaking and sealing her view in unpredictable rhythms. She breathed with it. Each exhale was deliberate, slow. Each movement of her fingers mechanical grace. 8 minutes passed. The SEALs crouched behind rocks, listening to their own heartbeats echo in their helmets. The woman who had appeared from nowhere didn't move. She was part of the mountain now, still, patient, silent. Then her voice broke the quiet. I have visual on one shooter. Northern Ridge 2050 meters. Stand by. Her hands adjusted dials. Elevation, windage, temperature, humidity. She whispered the numbers to herself like prayer. Wind 12 northwest. Temperature 52. Humidity 75. Correction 7.6 MOA. The world narrowed to a single point in her scope. A shape barely human, half hidden behind rock. A gloved hand adjusting a rifle. Hadley's breath steadied. Her finger found the trigger's first pressure. Time slowed. Then one suppressed crack. She rode the recoil, never blinking, staying locked to the target through her optic. 3 seconds of bullet flight. Then the shape collapsed. Hit, she said quietly. Target down, 2,047 meters. Morrison lowered his binoculars, disbelief written across his face. Around him, the SEALs stared. The silence that followed wasn't just shock, it was reverence. Confirmed, Morrison said softly. Enemy sniper down. Hadley worked the bolt, chambered another round. That's one, you said at least 3. She scanned again. The fog thickened, then thinned, then broke just enough for her to glimpse another figure. 2,120 meters. This one shifted position between boulders, his confidence unbroken by the death of his comrade. Second target acquired, she murmured. Another adjustment, another breath, another shot. The second sniper fell before he even finished aligning his scope. Hadley's voice was calm, but beneath it, something moved, a quiet sadness she never showed. The kind that comes from too many confirmed kills, too many perfect equations that end in death. 2 down, 1 to go. She scanned again, methodically. The third sniper, if he existed, had gone still. No movement, no glint of scope. She stayed on overwatch while the SEALs held their ground. Finally, Morrison spoke again, voice low in awe. Sergeant, those were the 2 best shots I've ever seen. Hadley didn't look up from her scope. It's just math, Lieutenant. Measure correctly, calculate precisely, execute the fundamentals. The distance doesn't change the truth of a shot. He smiled faintly despite the tension. You make math look like witchcraft. She didn't reply. She'd heard that before. The fog began to lift gradually, the valley below revealing itself in muted tones of gray and green. For the first time, the SEAL team could see the distant ridge where their attackers had been. The 2 motionless figures told the rest of the story. Morrison keyed his radio again. Griffin 6 to TOC, be advised, we have counter-sniper support on station. 2 enemy snipers neutralized. Continuing mission. The words felt strange even as he said them. Counter-sniper support. From where? From whom? From the mist itself. Hadley began packing her gear, every movement smooth, silent, efficient. She didn't celebrate, didn't smile, didn't explain. Morrison caught up to her as the team began to advance. You operating alone out here? Yes, sir, she said simply. For 3 days at this altitude. I prefer it that way. He studied her face, a calm mask of discipline and fatigue. He wanted to ask more, but something in her expression stopped him. Maybe it was the quiet exhaustion. Maybe it was respect. They moved together along the ridge, the fog closing in again around them like a curtain. In that moment, the mountains held their breath. Hadley wasn't thinking about the shots she'd made. She was thinking about the ones she hadn't had to, the lives she'd just preserved, the men below who would go home because she existed in the gray spaces between orders and instinct. She adjusted the strap on her rifle, eyes scanning the horizon where the next fight waited, unseen. Sometimes, she thought, the most powerful presence on a battlefield isn't the loudest voice or the brightest flash. It's the quiet silhouette in the fog, unseen but certain, choosing when to act, when to vanish, and when to let silence speak for her. And for the first time in hours, she let herself breathe. Because in war, being invisible wasn't just her job, it was her survival. How do you trust someone you've only known through gunfire? That question lingered between the SEAL team and the woman who'd saved them. The air was thinner now, the fog curling low, tracing the outlines of their helmets like ghosts trying to cling. Every breath came with the weight of cold and adrenaline. They were moving again, 12 shadows across a mountain slope, and Hadley slightly above them, maintaining overwatch. Always above, always watching. Lieutenant Morrison kept glancing back, as if to make sure she was still there. He'd led men through countless operations, faced impossible odds, seen good soldiers crumble under chaos. But this quiet woman with the calm precision of a machine and the eyes of someone who'd forgotten how to be surprised, she unnerved him. Hadley could feel his eyes on her even from distance. She didn't blame him. Trust was a luxury in war, and she'd never been good at asking for luxuries. "Sergeant," his voice came through her earpiece, low and clipped. "We're 30 minutes from objective. Terrain looks rough ahead. You'll have line of sight from the next ridge." "Affirmative," she said, voice steady. "Elevation's better up there. I'll maintain cover all the way to your breach point." There was a pause, a slight exhale of relief through the radio. "Copy that, and good shooting back there." Hadley didn't respond. Compliments in the field always felt misplaced. The mountain didn't care about skill, it cared about survival. She moved in silence, her steps precise, measured, the way a pianist touches keys they've played 1,000 times before. The wind bit through her gloves, her fingertips aching from the cold. Every inch of her gear felt heavier than it had the day before. For 3 days she had lived like a ghost, no warmth, no voice, no human proximity. And now, being surrounded by other soldiers again felt strange. Familiar, yet distant, like looking at her old life through someone else's scope. Down below, the SEALs reached their next checkpoint, an observation ledge overlooking a narrow valley. The compound sat across from them, partially visible through drifting fog. Concrete walls, corrugated metal roofs, faint movement. Too quiet. Morrison crouched, bringing up his binoculars. Got eyes on structures, about 8 buildings inside the perimeter, defensive walls all around, guard tower north corner. Hadley was already prone, her rifle settled into the earth, her breathing slowed to rhythm. Through her scope, the compound was a series of shapes and angles, each one a potential threat. "I see them," she said. "Northeast tower, 1 sentry, machine gun on the roof of the main building, another cluster of fighters on the western wall. Looks like 3, maybe 4. Morrison exhaled slowly. "Can you hit those positions from where you are?" "Affirmative. Range between 14 and 1,500 meters, all within capability." He hesitated. "Once you start shooting, they'll know we're here." Hadley adjusted her focus. "They'll know for less than a minute." She began her calculations. Range, elevation, wind. The rhythm of her process was ritualistic, numbers giving order to chaos. She lined up her targets one by one, mentally mapping a sequence. Tower, roof gunner, wall fighters. Each adjustment in her scope was a note in a song only she could hear. "Ready," she whispered. "Execute on your mark," Morrison said, his voice tightening. Hadley took a breath. The world went still. Her crosshairs settled on the sentry in the tower, just a silhouette against a patch of lighter fog. She exhaled, squeezed the trigger. The recoil was a whisper against her shoulder. Through her scope, the sentry fell. She worked the bolt in one fluid motion, already moving to the second target, the machine gunner. He was pivoting, reacting to the first shot. Too late. The second shot cracked through the air. Another collapse. Third target, western wall, multiple hostiles. She picked the one giving orders, the one gesturing frantically. She fired again. The man dropped backward, his body jerking like a marionette cut from its strings. 3 positions down, she said, her voice flat, almost detached. Morrison didn't wait. All teams move, move, move. The SEALs sprinted down the slope, the sound of boots crunching gravel cutting through the echo of gunfire. Hadley tracked them through her scope, covering their descent. Every time a head appeared on a rooftop, she adjusted and fired. Each impact was invisible precision. The enemy never saw her. They only saw death arriving from nowhere. But amid the calm, she felt something stir, a flicker she didn't want to name. Not pride, not excitement, something closer to sorrow. Every trigger pull, every confirmed hit came with the same quiet reminder. Every skill she had was measured by the lives it ended. Overwatch, this is Griffin 6, Morrison's voice broke through again. We're breaching outer wall, engaging interior. Keep eyes north and east. Copy, you're covered. Through her scope, Hadley caught movement, a man climbing the main building's roof, rifle raised toward the SEALs. Range, 1,450 meters. She fired. The man dropped before he could even take aim. Another fighter appeared near the machine gun she'd silenced minutes earlier, trying to rearm it. She adjusted slightly, fired again. Target down. She could feel her pulse now, a slow thrum behind her ribs. The weight of repetition, precision, control. When she first learned long-range shooting, an instructor had told her something that never left her. A good sniper kills from so far away, they don't have to feel it. He was wrong, you always feel it, you just learn how to hide it better. For 15 minutes, she stayed locked to her scope, clearing threats before they could breathe danger into the team below. Each shot a decision, each kill an equation balanced by her silence. Then finally, Morrison's voice came through. Overwatch compound secure. HVT confirmed KIA. We're collecting intel for exfil. Copy, maintaining Overwatch. Hadley adjusted her position slightly, stretching the tension from her neck. The cold bit deeper now that the adrenaline had thinned. Her fingers were trembling not from fear but fatigue. 3 days without rest, minimal rations, cold wind cutting through her uniform. Down below, the SEALs moved through the compound methodically, clearing rooms, gathering documents, voices low, professional, steady. From her Overwatch position, Hadley watched them move like clockwork, each man trusting the other to complete his piece of the puzzle. It was something she'd forgotten, what it looked like when soldiers operated as one. She'd chosen the solitude of a lone sniper's life years ago. Fewer people meant fewer vulnerabilities, but watching them now, she felt a strange ache, something almost like nostalgia. The kind that whispers, you used to belong somewhere too. 20 minutes later, the team emerged, carrying what looked like sensitive files and hard drives. The radio crackled again. Overwatch Griffin 6, exfil point Bravo, moving in 5. Copy, I'll link up at extraction. When she reached them, the fog had thinned enough to reveal faces. Real faces, sweat, grime, exhaustion. Morrison approached first, his expression unreadable beneath his helmet. Sergeant Mitchell, he said finally. 11 confirmed kills during this op, all yours, everyone prevented a casualty. You saved lives today. Hadley shook her head slightly. Just doing my job, Lieutenant. Your job? Chief Carter stepped forward, disbelief in his voice. Ma'am, most shooters can't see that far, let alone hit. What you did today, that's not standard. Hadley gave a faint smile, one that didn't reach her eyes. I trained for it, that's all. Where did you train? Morrison asked. She hesitated, then answered, Special Operations Sniper Course. Then Advanced Long-Range Program. Details are classified. He studied her again, curiosity edged with respect. You've been out here 3 days alone, at 8,000 feet. That's insane. Solo ops are cleaner, she said simply. No one compromises your position. No one slows you down. Chief Carter frowned. And if something goes wrong? I adapt, she said, carefully, quietly, alone. Morrison exchanged a look with Carter, half disbelief, half admiration. You realize what you did today changes how my men think about distance, Sergeant. You made the impossible look routine. Hadley looked away toward the mountains. The impossible just means no one's tried long enough. Moments later, the deep, rhythmic thump of rotors filled the air. Extraction birds. The wind from their descent whipped the fog into torn ribbons of white. The SEALs moved quickly, securing gear, preparing for pickup. As Hadley climbed aboard, she felt the eyes of the team on her, curious, grateful, a little unsure. She didn't speak, didn't need to. During the flight back, the helicopter's cabin was filled with vibration and silence. The men whispered among themselves, trading half-jokes and glances toward her, the sniper who had come from nowhere. Carter finally leaned forward, raising his voice over the noise. Ma'am, how'd you even get here? High-altitude parachute drop, she replied. 72 hours ago. Morrison let out a quiet laugh. Jesus, you've been freezing up here alone for 3 days, living off rations, and then you stroll out of the fog like some kind of ghost. Hadley looked out the window at the fatting outline of the mountains below. Ghosts don't leave footprints, Lieutenant. I do. They just fade faster than most people notice. When they landed at the forward base, Colonel Richards was waiting. Sergeant Mitchell, he said, greeting her with the tone of a man who'd expected excellence and still been surprised. I've read the after-action. 11 confirmed kills at over 1,400 meters, including counter-sniper support. Outstanding work. Thank you, sir. He smiled faintly. The SEALs said you walked out of the fog like a legend. I'd say you've earned the nickname. She shook her head. I prefer to avoid legends, sir. They attract too much attention. Richards chuckled. Too late for that. As she walked away, the mountain wind still clinging to her uniform, Hadley thought about the word legend. It sounded hollow. Legends belonged to people who wanted to be remembered. She only wanted to disappear again. Into the mist, into the numbers, into the silence that had always been safer than glory. Because glory demanded to be seen. And she had spent her life mastering the art of vanishing. When the fog finally lifted, it didn't just leave the mountains. It left her. Back at the forward operating base, Hadley Mitchell found herself in a place that always felt stranger than the field, civilization in miniature, surrounded by chaos. The metallic echo of helicopter blades, the smell of diesel and dust, the low hum of voices trying to sound normal after seeing too much. She walked past groups of soldiers, their laughter sharp and short-lived, their eyes flicking toward her with a curiosity they didn't bother to hide. The story of what she'd done in the mountains had spread faster than gunfire. A woman sniper. Operating alone. 11 confirmed kills at impossible distance. The myth had already started writing itself. Hadley hated myths. They had a way of simplifying people until only the easy parts remained. They erased the cold, the fear, the long hours of crawling through mud and silence, all the invisible details that made a life bearable. Inside her small quarters, she sat on the edge of the cot, stripped down her rifle and cleaned it in silence. Each motion was deliberate, slow, meditative. The weapon was more than a tool, it was an anchor, something she could control in a world that never stopped shifting. She paused for a moment, staring at her reflection in the black sheen of the barrel. Her hazel eyes looked tired, older. The radio on her table crackled softly, background chatter, nothing directed to her. But even in that static, she could hear the unspoken tone. Who is she? Where did she come from? She smiled faintly. It didn't matter. People always wanted to name things they couldn't understand. 3 days later, she was called to the operations tent. Colonel Richard stood beside a projection screen covered in topographic maps. The lines of his face were drawn deep by fatigue and command. "Sergeant Mitchell," he said as she entered, nodding once, "I've got a new assignment for you, something unique." Hadley stopped at attention. "Yes, sir." He gestured toward the map. "We've identified an enemy commander, high value. He's responsible for several ambushes against coalition patrols. Slippery, paranoid, always moving. But we've got confirmation he'll be in this valley tomorrow. Noon. A compound surrounded by heavy defenses and civilian presence. No airstrike authorization." She leaned closer, scanning the map. The contour lines tightened near the coordinates. The compound sat deep inside enemy-controlled territory, surrounded by high ridges. Richards continued, "There's an elevated position here, roughly 2,800 meters out. Not ideal terrain, but possible overwatch." Hadley looked up slowly. 2,800 meters. He nodded. "At the edge of any known engagement record, you'd be pushing beyond standard limits." Her pulse slowed, not from fear but from the weight of calculation. 2,800 meters wasn't just distance. It was time, wind, temperature, curvature, density, gravity. 1,000 small betrayals waiting to ruin a perfect line. She exhaled through her nose. "I've never taken a combat shot that long, sir." "I know, but you're the only one with a chance. If you don't think it's possible, we'll abort and find another way." Hadley studied the satellite imagery again, the compound, the angle of approach, the faint glint of rooftops. Then she nodded once. "It's possible," she said quietly, "if conditions hold." Richard's gaze softened. "Then it's your call. You leave before dawn. Solo insertion. Take what you need. No one else knows about this op." When she turned to leave, he added, "Mitchell, whatever happens out there, know this. Your work these past weeks has saved lives. You've earned the trust of this command." She didn't answer. Trust was a currency she'd stopped spending long ago. That night she barely slept. She sat beside her rifle checking data, writing quick notes in a small weatherproof notebook. Wind speeds, humidity at elevation, ballistic coefficients. The math was endless. The kind of math that could decide between success and a lifetime of regret. Outside, the desert air was still. Somewhere beyond the perimeter, a coyote howled, distant, lonely, familiar. She thought of home, of the life she'd left behind years ago when she realized she was better at distance than closeness. Some people measured love by proximity. Hadley measured it by silence. Distance was the only way she knew how to protect what she cared about. At 4:30, a single helicopter lifted her into the cold gray of morning. The pilot didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. Her reputation had become its own clearance. As they neared the drop zone, the terrain rose sharply, black stone ridges and skeletal trees wrapped in fog. The pilot hovered just long enough for her to jump. The wind tore at her parachute as she descended into the mountain's throat, the world below dissolving into white. When her boots hit the ground, she was alone again. Exactly how she preferred it. She moved fast, efficient, climbing to the designated ridge at 9,100 feet. Her lungs burned from the altitude, but she ignored it. Every step was an equation, distance versus stability, effort versus stealth. By the time she reached her position, the sun was high enough to burn away the last shreds of fog. She set down her pack, unrolled her mat, and began constructing her world. Rangefinder, spotting scope, wind meter, ballistic computer, rifle. It took her 6 hours to prepare. 6 hours of reading the wind through grass movement. 6 hours of watching dust drift and leaves tremble. 6 hours of breathing with the mountain until her heartbeat matched its pulse. At 11:55, movement flickered in the courtyard below, tiny shapes, smaller than ants. Through her scope at full magnification, they looked impossibly far away. She spoke softly into her mic, though no one was there to hear it. Target area in sight. Range confirmed, 2795 meters. Her voice sounded foreign in the silence. Then the target appeared. She knew him instantly, the way others deferred to him, the sharp posture of a man used to power. Even through the distortion of heat shimmer, his arrogance was visible. He believed the mountains made him safe. Hadley adjusted her elevation turret, 78.4 MOA. Windage, 13.2. Her calculations were already memorized, her mind a map of angles and variables. But even with all that science, the shot would still need something less measurable. Intuition. Faith. A tiny thread of belief between her and the bullet she was about to send into history. She steadied her breathing. Her crosshairs floated above and right of the man's chest. Her aim point was nowhere near the target. It was math guiding instinct. She waited for the wind to drop. For a heartbeat, the world held still. Then the trigger broke. The recoil pushed against her shoulder, gentle but final. The bullet left the barrel at nearly 3,000 feet per second. It would be in flight for over 4 seconds, a lifetime to think about what you've just done. Hadley kept her eye to the scope, time stretched. She counted in silence. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then the man in the courtyard fell. No sound reached her, just the small, distant shift of bodies scattering, confusion rippling through the compound like a wave. She exhaled once, barely audible. Target down, 2795 meters. There was no celebration, only the faint, hollow echo of her own pulse. She keyed her radio. Granite base, Overwatch 1, target neutralized, 1 shot, confirmed hit at 2795 meters. Silence, then Colonel Richards' voice, rough with disbelief. Overwatch 1, confirm that last transmission. Confirmed, sir. Another pause. That's beyond any record I've ever heard of. Hadley looked through her scope again, watching the chaos unfold below. She didn't answer. Numbers didn't care about records. A helicopter extracted her 2 hours later. The ride back was quiet. She sat beside her rifle, watching sunlight bend through the windows, turning dust into gold. When they landed, 2 officers were waiting, Colonel Richards and someone she didn't recognize. A woman in a crisp uniform with 2 stars on her chest. Major General Patricia Stone. The general studied her for a long moment before speaking. Sergeant Mitchell, I've reviewed your report. You're telling me you made a confirmed kill at 2,795 meters. Yes, ma'am. How? Hadley met her gaze. Math, time, preparation, and luck. The general exhaled slowly, as if processing the weight of that sentence. That shot breaks every known operational record. You've done something extraordinary. Hadley didn't reply. Words like extraordinary and historic felt meaningless out here. They didn't sound the same when you'd seen what extraordinary actually cost. Stone smiled faintly. Effective immediately, you're promoted to Sergeant First Class. You'll receive the Bronze Star with Valor. But more than that, you've changed how we think about range, precision, possibility. Hadley nodded once, still expressionless. Yes, ma'am. As the general turned to leave, Richards lingered a moment longer. You realize they're going to study that shot for years. You've rewritten the limits. Hadley looked down at her hands, the same hands that trembled when they weren't holding a rifle. The limits were never real, sir, just comfortable. That night she sat alone again. The stars above the base were bright, sharp, almost too clean. She thought about distance, not the kind she measured with scopes and rangefinders, but the kind between people. The farther she shot, the more she understood it. Distance was safety. Distance was control. Distance was the only way to hit the mark without letting the heart get in the way. Still, somewhere in the back of her mind, she wondered what it would feel like to miss, not because of wind or calculation, but because she wanted to. Because sometimes, pulling the trigger was easier than living with the reasons you don't. They called her the fog before she even knew it. At first, it was just a whisper, a word passed between SEALs, Rangers, and intel operators who'd been there, who had seen her appear out of nowhere, shoot the impossible, and vanish before anyone could even thank her. She'd earned it the way most legends are born, accidentally. Back at the base, rumors multiplied faster than reports. Some said she wasn't real. Others swore she was an experimental asset, some classified hybrid between soldier and machine. And a few, the ones who had seen her work, simply called her what she was, the woman who came from the mountains, carrying the silence with her. Hadley ignored it. She always had a strange relationship with recognition. Praise slid off her like rain on cold metal. It didn't stick. It didn't belong to her. The only thing that belonged to her were the calculations, the wind calls, the stillness between heartbeats where the world finally obeyed her will. But still the name followed her. The fog. It wasn't wrong, she liked the irony. Fog hid things, blurred them, made the dangerous beautiful. Her next few weeks blurred too, a series of missions, each one a new variation on the same unspoken command. Find the enemy before they find us. 3 times she deployed in support of other special operations teams. 3 times she set up on some godforsaken ridge no one else could reach. And 3 times her shots arrived before her name did. The kill count grew, 43 confirmed, ranges from 1,400 meters to over 2,000. And yet, when people spoke about her, they never mentioned the numbers. They mentioned the feeling, the calm that settled when she was watching over them. Because with Hadley Mitchell on Overwatch, men stopped dying. It wasn't about heroics. It was math, patience, and trust in silence. But silence, like fog, has a price. Late one night, after her 3rd operation that month, she sat alone outside the barracks, a half-empty mug of coffee cooling beside her. The night was windless, still, the kind of still that reminded her of the seconds before a shot. In the distance, she could hear laughter, the SEALs she'd worked with celebrating another mission complete. Their voices were rough, alive, human. She envied that sound. People often mistook her calm for coldness, but calm wasn't absence. It was armor. It was how she survived in a profession that demanded detachment. Sometimes, when she lay awake at night, she'd wonder who she might have been if she hadn't chosen the distance. If she hadn't trained her heart to be as precise as her aim, always measured, always contained. But then she'd remember what chaos felt like, the screaming, the confusion, the moments when control slipped away, and she'd remind herself, solitude isn't loneliness, it's clarity. At least that's what she told herself. The next morning, she was summoned again to Colonel Richard's office. The man greeted her with that same faint, proud exhaustion she'd come to recognize, the look of someone who commanded brilliance but worried about the cost. "Mitchell," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "The general's recommendation came through. You're being reassigned." Hadley stayed standing. "Reassigned, sir." He nodded. "Specialized unit, extreme long-range operations, training, research, and direct action. You'll be part of a small team or leading it more accurately." A flicker of surprise passed over her face. "Teaching." "In part. They want your techniques formalized. Your environmental tracking, your solo operating methods, your shot preparation. You've done things we didn't think possible." She looked away. "And what if I'm not built for teaching?" Richard smiled faintly. "Then teach them what silence feels like before it breaks. That'll be lesson enough." There was a pause. Then his tone softened. "You should know something else. The SEAL team you supported, Morrison's team, they put in a formal request to see you before you ship out." Hadley raised an eyebrow. To see me. They insisted. I think they want to say what soldiers rarely get to say to the people who save them. She didn't answer. Words like thank you always made her uncomfortable. They felt like trying to explain the unexplainable. That evening, in the hangar where she prepped her gear, she heard footsteps. She turned to see Lieutenant Morrison and his team walking in, a dozen men who looked less like warriors now and more like people trying to find the right words. Morrison stepped forward, removing his cap. "Sergeant Mitchell," he said, his voice lower than usual, "we heard about your reassignment. We couldn't let you leave without saying something." Hadley kept her hands on her rifle, wiping down the barrel. "You didn't need to." "Maybe not," he said, "but we wanted to." He glanced at his men, then back to her. "You saved my team more than once. You stepped out of nowhere, made shots we thought were impossible, and vanished before we could even understand what happened. I've led dozens of missions, but I've never seen anyone operate like you do. What you did out there, that's the kind of thing that changes how people believe in each other." Hadley felt her throat tighten, but she didn't show it. "I just did my job." Chief Carter stepped forward. "Ma'am, I've worked with snipers all my life. None of them could have done what you did. That 2,795-meter shot, that's not skill. That's," he paused, searching for the right word, "something the rest of us will spend our careers chasing." She looked up from her rifle then, meeting their eyes for the first time in weeks. "It wasn't luck, Chief. It was practice. Years of it. Anyone could do the same with enough time." Morrison shook his head. "No, Sergeant, you make it sound simple, but we all know it's not. Maybe that's your secret, you believe it is." One of the younger SEALs, barely older than 20, spoke up quietly. "Ma'am, is it true they're calling you the Fog now?" Hadley smiled faintly. "So I've heard." "It fits," the young man said. "You appear when everything's chaos. Then when it's clear again, you're gone, like you were never there at all." Her smile faded into thought. "Fog hides things, sailor. It keeps people from seeing too much. Maybe that's why I like it." Morrison studied her for a long moment. "You know, there's something strange about that. You operate invisible, but the results, they're impossible to ignore." She picked up her rifle case and closed it. "That's the point, Lieutenant. The job isn't about being seen. It's about making sure someone else gets to go home." For a moment, none of them spoke. The hangar filled with the sound of distance, rotors somewhere outside, the hum of generators, the small metallic click as she locked her gear. Then Morrison extended his hand. "Wherever you go next, Sergeant, they're lucky to have you." Hadley looked at the hand for a second, then shook it, firm, brief. "Good hunting, Lieutenant." When they left, she stood alone again. The air felt heavier, colder. She realized then that the nickname wasn't just a title, it was prophecy. She was becoming what they called her. A mist that rolled in, changed the shape of things, and then disappeared before anyone could touch it. And somewhere deep inside, she wondered if there was any way back from that kind of life. 2 days later, she was wheels up on a flight to an undisclosed location. Her next assignment classified, her future rewritten by her own precision. The hum of the aircraft engines was constant, hypnotic. She leaned her head back against the metal wall, eyes half closed. In the darkness, her mind replayed moments she couldn't seem to escape. The SEAL pinned behind a rock, shouting over the radio, the fog lifting, her finger tightening on the trigger, the target collapsing 2 miles away. Each memory landed the same way, quiet, inevitable, final. When the aircraft touched down, she was greeted by a small team, new faces, same mission. They saluted her, eyes sharp, curious, respectful. She looked at them and something in her chest twisted. They were about to learn what she already knew, that precision isn't power. It's isolation refined into a weapon. That night in her new quarters, Hadley stood at the window, watching fog roll across the valley below. The world looked soft, harmless, until you realized what hid inside it. She spoke to no one. She didn't need to. The mountain wind carried her thoughts somewhere only silence could understand. Maybe someday, people would remember her for the record shot, for the missions, for the number that broke every expectation. But she hoped not. If anyone remembered her at all, she wanted it to be for the quiet things, for the times she chose restraint instead of glory, for the times she stayed unseen so others could walk into the light. Because the truth she'd learned, the one no one wanted to hear, was simple. Precision doesn't make you stronger. It just teaches you how fragile everything else is. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts once perfectly, then fades back into the fog. They built the training compound in a place where the wind never stopped. The valley below was an open scar of stone and scrub, a natural range where bullets vanished into endless distance. It was the kind of place where sound carried and died at the same time, the perfect location for ghosts to practice the art of precision. Sergeant First Class Hadley Mitchell stood at the firing line, watching a row of new snipers struggle with the wind. Their shots cracked through the morning air, each one echoing off the mountains like a question that had no answer. She could tell everything she needed to know from the rhythm of their triggers. Too fast, too anxious, too emotional. "Slow down," she said quietly, not raising her voice. "You're fighting the wind instead of listening to it." One of the trainees, a broad-shouldered corporal with too much pride and not enough patience, looked up from his scope. "Ma'am, the wind keeps changing. Can't get a consistent read." Hadley walked to his position, crouching beside him. "It's not the wind that's inconsistent, it's your breathing." He frowned, confused. She pointed toward a patch of grass swaying near the target line. "You're reacting. You're supposed to anticipate. Don't chase the wind, predict it. Feel it before you measure it." The corporal swallowed. "How do you feel wind?" She glanced at him, that same calm, unblinking gaze that had unsettled entire teams of seasoned operators. "You stop thinking about everything else." He blinked. "Everything else." She stood. "Everything that makes you human." The next shot he fired hit center mass. Hadley nodded once, then turned and walked back down the line. She didn't smile. She rarely did. To the instructors she was methodical. To the trainees she was terrifying. To herself she was just tired. 2 months had passed since her reassignment. Her record-breaking shot had made her a symbol, not a person. The fog, the quiet sniper who rewrote the limits, the legend had grown so large it no longer fit the woman behind it. And she felt it every day. Every question they asked, every look of awe when she demonstrated, every whisper of "she's the one." She hated it. Because they were learning the wrong thing. They wanted to copy her results, not her restraint. They wanted to break her record, not understand why she never celebrated it. Precision wasn't glory. It was weight. And every perfect shot was another ounce pressing down on a soul already too heavy to lift. That night she stayed on the range after everyone left. The air was sharp and cold, the stars indifferent. She lay prone, her rifle aligned with a steel target 2,000 meters out. She didn't shoot, she just watched. Through the scope, the target shimmered in the heat distortion of the desert. For a long moment, it almost looked alive, like it might turn and walk away if she blinked. "Long day." The voice behind her was soft, hesitant. Hadley turned her head slightly. It was Lieutenant Avaris, one of the newer instructors assigned to the program. Mid-20s, sharp-minded, too kind for the job. Hadley nodded once. "Always." Reese crouched beside her. "You know, the recruits talk about you like you're part of the landscape. Half of them think you sleep out here." "Maybe I do." Reese smiled faintly. "You ever get tired of the stories?" "Stories are easier than truth," Hadley said. "What's the truth?" She looked back through her scope. "That distance doesn't make you untouchable. It just delays the consequences." Reese studied her for a moment. You talk like someone who's already said goodbye to everything that matters. Hadley exhaled. In this work, you don't say goodbye, you just stop reaching out. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, it was understanding. Then Reese said softly, "There's a mission briefing tomorrow. They want you on Overwatch again. Short notice." Hadley turned her scope off. "I thought I was here to train." "You are, but Command says they need someone who can see through fog." Hadley almost laughed, almost. "Funny how that nickname keeps following me. Maybe because you never stopped living in it." The next day she found herself back in a helicopter, the wind hammering against the hull, the familiar tension settling into her chest. The target was a convoy leader, an arms facilitator moving through a valley near the border. The operation was simple on paper: intercept, neutralize, extract. But paper didn't measure wind, distance, or the human heartbeat behind a trigger. When the team touched down, Hadley moved out alone, her gear cutting into her shoulders, the mountain's breath cold against her face. She reached her Overwatch position 2 hours before the convoy was expected to arrive. The terrain was cruel, sharp inclines, loose rock, thin air, but it felt like home. As she settled into her spot, she caught her reflection in the scope glass. She looked the same, calm, precise, distant, but something inside her had changed. The stillness she used to trust now felt heavier, the silence less peaceful. She adjusted her rifle, checked range. 1,900 meters to the road below. The wind was erratic, swirling off the cliffs. Then she heard the first engine. Dust plumes rose from the valley floor. 3 trucks, armored, moving fast. Hadley focused on the lead vehicle. The target was inside, window down, arm resting casually on the frame. Overconfident. She steadied her breathing, aligning the crosshairs slightly above and left. The wind shifted. She waited. Seconds stretched, her heartbeat slowed. Then a burst of movement. A child ran across the road ahead of the convoy. The vehicles braked suddenly, chaos rippling through the formation. Hadley's breath caught. Through her scope she saw the child's face, no more than 9 or 10, frozen in headlights. Her finger hovered above the trigger. The target was visible. The shot was possible. But the child was in the line. "Overwatch, this is Command," the radio crackled. "Do you have the target?" Hadley stayed silent. Her finger trembled. "Overwatch, confirm visual." She whispered, "Not clear." "Repeat." "Not clear, civilian in proximity." "Static, then, copy, hold fire." The convoy paused. Soldiers jumped out, shouting, corralling the boy away. Within seconds the trucks accelerated again, disappearing into the valley. Target lost. Hadley stayed prone, her pulse roaring in her ears. She could almost hear her instructor's voice from years ago. A sniper's job isn't to hesitate. But she had. When she returned to base, the debrief was curt. Target escaped, mission compromised. Colonel Richards didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "Sergeant, I need to know why you held fire." Hadley met his eyes. Collateral risk. Was the shot possible? Yes. Then why didn't you take it? Because possible isn't the same as right. He studied her in silence. Then quietly, "You know, most operators wouldn't have made that call." "I know," she said. "That's why I did." Later that night, she found herself on the range again, lying under the same indifferent stars. Her rifle beside her, her conscience louder than the wind. Ava Reese approached, a mug of coffee in hand. "Heard what happened?" Hadley didn't move. "You here to tell me I should have taken the shot?" Reese shook her head. "I'm here because everyone else would have." For the first time in days, Hadley looked at someone, really looked. "I used to think precision was about control," she said quietly. "But it's really about restraint, knowing when not to pull the trigger." Reese nodded slowly. "Maybe that's what they really sent you here to teach." Hadley smiled faintly. If they're listening, maybe. The wind shifted again, cold and restless, carrying sand across the range. Hadley lay back against the earth, eyes on the stars. For the first time in years, she didn't feel the need to calculate distance or angle or drop. She just breathed. Because sometimes, clarity doesn't come from hitting the target. It comes from knowing when to let it go. And in that moment, in the dark quiet between duty and forgiveness, the fog lifted, if only for a while. The report didn't mention the child. Hadley had expected that. Official narratives rarely had room for inconvenient details. They lived in the margins, where truth waited quietly for someone brave enough to read between the lines. In the debrief file, her decision was summarized in one sentence. Overwatch held fire, resulting in failure to neutralize target. No mention of the heartbeat she almost ended. No record of the small figure that had stumbled into the scope's crosshairs, turning the impossible into the unthinkable. For 3 days, no one spoke to her about it. Then the call came. Sergeant First Class Mitchell, command wants to see you, now. She knew it was coming. You can shoot from miles away, but you can't outrun consequences. The briefing room was cold, metallic, sterile. Colonel Richards was there, his hands clasped on the table, his expression unreadable. Across from him sat Major General Patricia Stone, her face as sharp and polished as the stars on her shoulders. Hadley saluted. "Ma'am, sir." "At ease," Stone said, though her tone carried none of the comfort those words implied. "Sit down." Hadley did. Stone didn't waste time. "Your last mission resulted in a missed opportunity to eliminate a high-value target responsible for multiple civilian deaths and direct attacks on our forces. Explain your decision." Hadley's voice was steady. There was a child in the line of fire. Stone leaned forward. "Was the target visible?" "Yes, ma'am." "Was the shot within your capability?" "Yes." "Then why didn't you take it?" Hadley met her gaze. "Because killing him would have killed the boy too." The general's jaw tightened. "You were authorized to engage. Your mission was to eliminate the target at any cost." "With respect, ma'am," Hadley said quietly, "the phrase 'any cost' doesn't mean no conscience." For a moment the room went still. Even Richards looked away, exhaling slowly. Stone studied her in silence. "You've built a reputation on precision, Sergeant, on being the one who always delivers. This decision contradicts that record. You let an enemy escape." "Yes, ma'am," Hadley said. "I also let a child live." Richards closed his eyes briefly, as if trying to temper the collision between duty and humanity happening across his desk. Stone stood. "You're suspended from operational Overwatch pending review. Effective immediately, you're reassigned to base training duties." The words hit harder than she expected, not because of pride, but because the fog that had once been her home now felt like exile. "Yes, ma'am," Hadley said, voice low. "Understood." When she left the room, Richards called after her softly, "Hadley." She turned. "You did the right thing," he said, "just not the thing they reward." She nodded once, then walked out. Training duty was supposed to be rest. It felt more like punishment. Days turned into weeks. She spent her mornings teaching recruits the math of distance, the language of wind, the rhythm of stillness. They admired her, respected her, but none of them really saw her. At night she'd stay on the range long after the others were gone, staring through her scope at targets she never shot. Sometimes she'd whisper to the empty air, still breathing. She wasn't sure if she meant the boy or herself. Lieutenant Ava Reese found her like that one night lying prone in the dark, her rifle untouched. "You know they're not going to reverse the decision," Reese said gently. Hadley didn't look up. "I know. They've moved the target, he's still out there, and the next sniper might not hesitate." Hadley nodded. "I figured." Reese crouched beside her. "If you'd taken the shot, that boy would be dead. Maybe his family too. That's not a mistake, that's conscience. Conscience doesn't count on a scorecard, Hadley said. Out here, it's just another way to lose. Reese studied her. You're not wrong, but maybe it's the only thing that keeps us human. Hadley turned her head slightly, her eyes catching the dim light of the range lamps. Being human is a liability in this line of work. Maybe, Reese said softly, but it's also the only reason your record means anything. They sat there for a while, two soldiers in the dark, bound by silence thicker than fog. Finally, Reese said, "You ever wonder if the legends they make about us are just ways to forget what we really are?" Hadley exhaled. No legend ever tells the truth, just the parts people can stand to remember. The next morning, the fog rolled in again. It always did this time of year, soft gray curtains sliding between the valley and the sky. Hadley walked the perimeter of the range, watching her trainees practice. Their shots echoed in uneven rhythm, too hurried, too hungry. "Stop," she called. They froze. She stepped forward, her tone calm but sharp. "You all want perfection. You think it's about steady hands or perfect math. It's not. It's about judgment. Knowing when not to fire is harder than pulling the trigger." The younger snipers glanced at one another, uncertain. One of them asked, "Ma'am, is it true you let a target go?" She looked at him, not angry, just tired. "It's true." "Wasn't that against orders?" "It was," she said simply. "But orders don't always see what you see through a scope." Another recruit spoke up, hesitant. "Would you do it again?" Hadley's answer came without hesitation. "Yes." Silence, no one moved. "Ma'am," the first one said finally, "how do you live with that?" She smiled faintly. "By remembering that sometimes the hardest shot you'll ever make is the one you don't." They didn't ask again. When the session ended, Hadley stayed behind. The fog had thickened, visibility maybe 50 meters. The world felt small, quiet, almost merciful. She closed her eyes and listened. The sound of the wind, the click of a distant bolt action, the heartbeat she couldn't forget. Then a voice over her calm earpiece, faint, unexpected. "Overwatch, this is Colonel Richards." She frowned, tapping the receiver. "Go ahead, sir." "Intel just came in. The target you let go, he's back on the radar. Same region. We're running a joint op. I requested you personally." Hadley hesitated, thought I was grounded. "You are," Richards said. "Officially. Unofficially, I need your eyes, not your trigger, just Overwatch and advisory." She looked toward the horizon, the gray dissolving into silver light. "Copy that, sir. When do we move?" 2 hours. She hadn't expected to feel the weight of her rifle again. It felt heavier this time, as if it remembered what she hadn't done. The team deployed at dawn. Different faces now, new operators, younger, sharper, untested by moral ambiguity. Hadley stayed behind them on the ridge, her scope trained on the valley below. Through the haze, the convoy appeared familiar, almost identical. The same route, the same rhythm of engines. Her breath caught when she saw the lead vehicle. A different driver, same insignia. The target was there. She scanned the area instinctively, searching for movement, and froze. The boy. Far in the background, near a cluster of rocks, same size, same shape, watching from a distance, alive. She whispered to herself, "You made it." Her earpiece crackled. "Overwatch, confirmed target." "Target confirmed. Permission to engage." Hadley hesitated, then replied, "Negative. My position's advisory only. You have the green light." There was a long pause, then a younger sniper's voice, the new one, the corporal she'd trained. "Wind's erratic. Need your read, ma'am." She checked her instruments, glanced through the scope again. 3 clicks left, 1.5 up. Wind 12 northwest. "Copy that." She heard the shot before she saw it. A clean crack, precise. Through her scope, the target collapsed instantly. The boy ducked behind the rocks, unharmed. "Target neutralized." the sniper said, pride in his tone. Hadley exhaled, not relief, not victory, something gentler. Maybe this was what legacy looked like. Passing on the skill, the judgment, the understanding of when to act and when to hold still. When they extracted, Colonel Richards met her near the landing zone. "Good call keeping your position advisory," he said. "The trainee credited you with the correction." Hadley shook her head. "He made the shot." "You trained him too," Richards said. Then, after a pause, "You know you're not the fog because of how you disappear. You're the fog because you know when to clear." For the first time in weeks, Hadley smiled, small, genuine, fragile. "Maybe, sir. Or maybe I just learned that some clarity isn't meant for me." As the helicopter lifted off, she looked out over the valley, watching the fog drift apart under the morning sun. In that gray light, she thought of the boy, the missed shot, the second chance. Maybe there were no perfect missions, no perfect soldiers, just people trying to balance precision with compassion, calculation with conscience. She leaned her head back, closing her eyes. The wind outside roared, the rotors thundered, but inside the noise there was peace. Because for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like a ghost. She felt human. And that, she realized, was the hardest shot she'd ever made. She never knew when the story stopped being hers. It began with a headline, then a briefing, then a speech from someone who had never been there, using her name like a promise. By the time Hadley Mitchell heard the full version of her own legend, she barely recognized it. The Fog, they called her, the sniper who appeared from the mist, saved an entire SEAL platoon and made a record-breaking shot that rewrote modern warfare. In their words, she was fearless, perfect, untouchable. But perfection was a lie built on silence, and silence was never the whole story. At first, she ignored it. Then came the interviews she didn't attend, the commendations she didn't request, the training manuals quoting her name. Her hesitation, the moment she'd chosen life over orders, disappeared from every report. In its place, a clean narrative. Mission succeeded, record confirmed, target neutralized. No mention of doubt. No mention of the boy. No mention of conscience. The myth was easier to digest that way. She found out through whispers that recruitment videos were using her call sign, Overwatch 1, as a symbol of precision and discipline. There were even posters in sniper schools now, her silhouette against fog and mountains, a caption that read, "See beyond the distance." It felt like betrayal wrapped in flattery. When she passed the poster one day in the hallway, Lieutenant Ava Reese was standing beside it, studying it with a conflicted smile. "Didn't even ask permission," Reese said quietly. Hadley paused beside her. "They don't need permission to use a ghost." Reese looked at her. "You should be proud you changed things." "Did I?" Hadley's tone was flat. "Or did they just change me?" Reese tilted her head. "Maybe both." Hadley walked on without answering. The truth was, she didn't know what pride felt like anymore. The moment she'd squeezed that trigger at 2,795 meters, something inside her had gone quiet. Every shot after that had been an echo. Now all she could hear were other people's voices, rewriting the echo into a symphony she didn't recognize. Weeks passed. She stayed on base, teaching new recruits, reviewing long-range ballistic data, writing technical manuals that someone else would edit into doctrine. Her life had become procedural, mechanical, safe, detached. Every morning at 500, she walked the same gravel path to the range. The fog was always there to greet her, faithful, patient, familiar. One morning she found a letter waiting on her bunk. No sender, just a folded piece of paper creased by travel. Inside it read, "You don't know me. I was in that convoy, the one you didn't shoot. My son was the boy in the road. We escaped the area weeks later. He's alive because you hesitated, because you cared. I heard what they call you now, the fog." Maybe they don't know what fog really does. It doesn't just hide things. Sometimes it protects what's too fragile to face the light. No signature, just those words. Hadley read it twice, then folded it again with trembling hands. She didn't cry, not exactly, but her breath came uneven, her chest tight in a way that felt almost like forgiveness. For years she had measured her worth by distance, meters, wind speed, flight time. But here in her hands was something unmeasurable, a consequence she could live with. That night she sat outside under the dim perimeter lights. The stars were faint, the sky hazy with thin cloud. Ava Reese joined her, quiet as always, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Reese said softly. "Maybe I have," Hadley replied, handing her the folded letter. Reese read it slowly, her eyes softened. "He found you." "Or I found him," Hadley murmured. "Either way, he's the only one who remembers the story right." Reese nodded. "What are you going to do with it?" "Keep it," Hadley said. "Remind myself that not every mission ends in fire." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the hum of generators and the distant crack of someone practicing night fire. After a long pause, Reese said, "You ever think about leaving?" Hadley didn't answer at first. She traced the rim of her coffee mug with her thumb. "All the time. But leaving doesn't make the noise stop. It just makes it echo from farther away." "What would you do instead?" Hadley looked toward the horizon where the fog was rolling down the mountains again like a soft tide. "Maybe teach somewhere quiet." Civilian sighed. "Help people understand what this really means. Not the shooting, the choosing." Reese smiled faintly. "You'd make a good teacher." "I'd make a terrible recruiter." They both laughed softly, a rare sound between them. When Reese left, Hadley stayed, staring at the mountains until dawn. For the first time, the fog didn't feel like something she hid behind. It felt like something that had always understood her, soft, silent, merciful. A month later, she received orders for reassignment, stateside, instructional position. The military had turned her legend into a doctrine, Mitchell method, long-range interdiction, and terrain solitude techniques. Her name was in manuals now. Students would study her angles and formulas long after she was gone. But no one would study her hesitation. No one would teach her silence. And no one would know that her greatest shot was the one she never took. When she boarded the transport plane home, she carried only 2 things, her rifle and the letter from the boy's father. The flight was long, the kind of flight where engines hum like lullabies and thoughts drift somewhere between memory and regret. She thought of the people she'd met: Morrison, Carter, Reese, men and women whose lives had crossed hers briefly, each of them carrying a version of her story she'd never quite recognize. She thought of the mountain, the cold, the isolation, the endless calculations. And she thought of the boy, a flash of life in her crosshairs, reminding her that precision without mercy is just another kind of blindness. When she landed, a small reception team met her. Cameras, reporters, smiles too wide to be sincere. "Sergeant Mitchell," one of them said eagerly, "how does it feel to be the most successful female sniper in U.S. history?" Hadley adjusted the strap on her rifle case. "Depends how you define success. Is it true you made the longest confirmed kill in combat?" "Yes." "Do you ever think about it?" "Every day." "Any advice for young soldiers who want to follow in your footsteps?" She paused, then said softly, "Make sure you know why you're walking." The cameras clicked. The quotes would be edited later, the context lost. That was fine. The truth didn't need an audience. That night in a quiet motel near the coast, she opened the window and let the sound of the ocean fill the room. The fog had followed her even here, drifting in from the sea, soft and pale, wrapping the world in its familiar silence. She set her rifle on the table, the letter beside it. For a long time, she just watched the mist curl through the window, thinking about how far a bullet can travel and how much farther a story can go. Somewhere out there, someone was telling her tale again, making it bigger, cleaner, simpler. And somewhere else, a boy was alive because of the truth no one told. Hadley smiled faintly. "That's enough," she whispered. Then she closed her eyes and let the sound of waves replace the sound of wind. For the first time in years, she slept without dreaming of distance. The fog returned on her first morning home. It crept in from the sea before dawn, slow, deliberate, unhurried, blanketing the small coastal town in soft gray, the same color that had followed her across deserts, mountains, and war zones. She stood on her porch, coffee in hand, watching the tide roll beneath it. The ocean was calm, almost indifferent. She liked that. Indifference had always been easier to understand than judgment. The town was quiet. No sirens, no engines, just gulls and wind and the soft rhythm of waves folding against the rocks. After years of distance measured in meters and seconds, this stillness felt unreal, like standing inside someone else's life. She'd been home for 3 weeks now, long enough for the reporters to lose interest, for the mail to stop coming, for the uniform to feel like something that belonged to a ghost. She had traded precision for peace, but peace had its own kind of silence, one she was still learning to live with. Her small house overlooked the ocean. It had been her grandfather's, a fisherman who'd taught her how to read wind long before she'd learned to calculate it. She spent her mornings on the porch and her afternoons walking the cliffs, watching the gulls dive in formation. At night, she cleaned her rifle not to use it, but to remember. The weapon had become an artifact now, a reminder of who she had been and who she refused to become again. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, a car pulled up outside. The sound startled her, rare these days. When she stepped out, she saw Lieutenant Ava Reese standing beside the hood, wind tugging at her hair. "Didn't think you'd actually find this place," Hadley said with a faint smile. "Didn't think you'd actually answer the phone," Reese replied. They stood there for a moment, just looking at each other, the kind of look that carried years of unspoken respect. Reese finally said, "Got assigned to the same unit you trained last year. Thought you should know they still quote you before missions." Hadley raised an eyebrow. "That's so." "Yeah, the line about restraint. The hardest shot you'll ever make is the one you don't." They carved it on the wall of the training hall. Hadley looked out toward the horizon, where the sky was turning gold. "Guess words travel farther than bullets." Reese smiled. "You sound like a poet." "I sound like someone who's tired of hearing her own legend." Reese laughed softly. "You could always come back, teach officially. They'd take you in a heartbeat." Hadley shook her head. "They've already taken enough." Reese's smile faded. "You miss it though, the work, the team, the purpose." Hadley didn't deny it. "Sometimes, but missing something doesn't mean it's still yours." The younger woman nodded, then looked down, hesitating. "There's one more reason I came." Hadley waited. Reese handed her a sealed envelope, official military crest, but worn like it had traveled far. "Courier dropped it at my base," Reese said. "Said it was forwarded from overseas." Hadley frowned, breaking the seal. Inside was a single photograph. A boy, maybe 11 or 12 now, standing beside an older man on a hillside. The boy was holding a small wooden carving of a rifle. On the back, in careful handwriting, "He remembers the fog. He remembers being seen." Hadley stared at it for a long time, her hand trembling. Reese's voice softened. "That's the boy, isn't it?" Hadley nodded slowly. "He lived." "Because you hesitated." "Because I listened," Hadley whispered, "to something we're trained to ignore." Reese said quietly, "Maybe that's what makes you different." Hadley's eyes were still on the photo. "Different doesn't always mean right, but maybe it means awake." She slipped the photo into her pocket, then looked up at Reese. "You heading back tonight?" "Yeah, early flight. Command's cracking down on a new operation. Politics more than purpose. Hadley nodded. That's how it starts. Reese hesitated, then said, "You know, they might never tell your story right." Hadley smiled faintly. "They already didn't, but that's fine. Some stories aren't meant to be told. They're meant to be lived quietly." They said their goodbyes with a firm handshake and a shared look, the kind that didn't need words. As the car drove off, Hadley stood alone again, the wind tugging at her hair, the sea stretching endlessly before her. She pulled the photograph from her pocket once more. The boy's smile was small but certain. In it, she saw something she hadn't felt in years: purpose without burden. That night she walked down to the shoreline. The fog was thick, silver under the moonlight. She stood barefoot on the wet sand, the waves touching her toes, the horizon lost in gray. It was the same color as every mission she'd ever taken, every dawn she'd waded through, every silence she'd learned to survive. But tonight the fog didn't feel heavy, it felt gentle. She whispered to it like an old friend, "You followed me long enough, maybe it's time to rest." A breeze moved through, soft and cool, as if answering. She closed her eyes. For a moment she imagined all the places the wind had carried her name: briefing rooms, barracks, distant training ranges. And she imagined them fading, replaced by something quieter: a boy's laughter, a teacher's advice, the rhythm of the sea. When she opened her eyes, the fog had thinned. She could see the line of the horizon now, faint but clear. She smiled. "Guess you were never the enemy after all." Weeks turned into months. Hadley found work teaching marksmanship at a coastal academy, not for soldiers but for search and rescue teams, park rangers and firefighters, people who used precision not to destroy but to save. The students didn't know her past, they just called her Miss Mitchell. Sometimes when she corrected a stance or adjusted a grip, she'd see that same flicker of intensity in their eyes, the hunger to prove themselves. She recognized it. And she always told them the same thing: accuracy matters less than intention. Anyone can hit a target, not everyone can live with what happens after. They didn't always understand it, but one day they would. On her last day of the season, a storm rolled in. Heavy winds, thick fog. The rescue team had gone out after a capsized fishing boat. Hadley stayed by the radio, monitoring weather patterns, listening to static. Then a call came through. "Base, we've got eyes on the survivors. Visual impaired by fog." Hadley leaned forward, heart quickening. "This is Mitchell. Winds shifting northwest. Follow the current break, you'll see light reflecting off the hull. That's your visual cue." Seconds later, "Copy that, we see it, moving in." She smiled, leaning back. The fog once again wasn't an obstacle, it was a guide. When the team returned safely, drenched and exhausted, one of them approached her. "How'd you see that in this mess?" Hadley looked out toward the sea. Didn't need to see, just needed to remember how the wind talks. He grinned. "You're a legend, Miss Mitchell." She laughed softly. "Don't believe everything you hear about legends." Then she turned back to the fog, her oldest companion, her quiet witness, and whispered the words she'd once said to a new recruit on a mountain years ago. "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." The sea answered with a crash against the rocks, a sound both final and eternal. And for the first time, she didn't think about distance or wind or angles. She thought about grace, the kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind that lingers, like fog after dawn,